Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and I've got another few models that I'll be painting for my 10th First and Only Army, and unlike a lot of my recent videos, these will not be Cadians, or Victoria miniatures. These are, in fact, classic metal Games Workshop Imperial Guard. We have the old catachan heavy bolt gunner, and he's on a little kind of wheeled chassis, and then we have, strangely enough, the bassilisk kind of crewman who's on the back of the gantry on the back of the artillery tank, and I've given him a last gun and he's going to be the loader for this heavy weapons team. I've already 3D printed and done the detail work to the base, but there is one important thing that these guys need before I go any further, and that means I need to break out the milliput because I will be sculpting some cloaks. Now that I'm a few videos into sculpting cloaks for the Tanith, I feel I've picked out a few of the bad ideas that I started with, and I'm working with quite a different process now. I still have the mould that I created in my very first model, and I still think this is a useful piece, but it doesn't have the legs to be the full process like I maybe thought it would be when I made it. It doesn't create good edges, and the texture on each side isn't what I'd like for the final piece. But pressing a cloak when fitted to a model just makes it collapse. So here I'm cleaning up the edges and smoothing the inside and outside surfaces on the side of the mold where it's just flat silicon, because it's easier to do it here than it is on the model. And then I had an idea, something I hadn't planned in the slightest, and probably shouldn't have gone with in the heat of the moment, right? Well, wrong, because of course you should go with inspiration whenever you're working on some artistic context. Some new colour, some new shape, some new process. Give it a try. If it doesn't work, that's fine, you still learned. Well, this time I'm adding in some of the pronounced folds that many of the other designs of cloaks have, particularly the original 2002 Gaunt metal models. Rather than trying to fold the milliput sheet for real, which would be extremely difficult to work with and probably just fracture, I'm adding a thin roll of extra material in a stripe and then pressing it into the main part of the cloak and using the sculpting tools to form it into a single piece that appears to be folded. Once I've played around with it and I'm happy with the rough appearance and the texture, I transfer it onto the catachan's head-sized shoulders. The technique of adding extra bits and squishing it together to form a single piece gave me another idea. Neither of my previous sculpted cloaks included a sculpted hood. And to prevent them all from looking like the only soldiers in the army who hadn't gotten any hoods, I add another thin roll, this time folded into a roughly kind of V-shaped or a U-shape so that it would look like a hood just laid back over the shoulders. And I set about fussing with this, fusing it into the cloak, folding it down, pressing it in so that it was all nice and secure and looked about right. The one particular thing I want to do here is take my time. There's an explosion of what's the fastest, what's the easiest, what's the least effort methods and techniques. And whilst, yes, I think that's certainly valuable for bringing in people into the hobby or for experimenting with a new technique like sculpting, which I've never done before, it shouldn't be the total of skills that someone learns. Rather, as you spend more time in a particular part of a hobby, you should slowly pick up more skills and techniques, more ways of doing things that take longer and that require more input, that are more methodical or technical. Because many times, not only do these ways end up with a nicer looking model, they're far more enjoyable to do. The two cloaks I built for these two models are certainly more enjoyable to sculpt than my original, although the original was very interesting as I'd never really sculpted before. You may notice that I have not used the entire cloak mold shape, which includes the chest piece and a shape for the head to be fitted. Now both of the models today have the head as one piece with the torso, so I tried instead building the front section of the cloak one clump of milliput at a time. I'm still learning which of the tools is more appropriate for which shape, which ones are useful to smooth out surfaces, which ones can make shapes that look like folds, and which ones are best to clean up edges. I'm still a long way off being an expert at this, but after only a few attempts I'm really happy that I'm getting reasonably good at this. For the loader, I pretty much follow all of the same steps, except this time I forget to move my camera, so I can't show most of it. Well, once the cloak is on his shoulders, I try to make the cloak match the mould of the model. The gunner is happily sitting in the gun carriage, so the cloak is resting pretty much straight off of his shoulders. But the loader model is reaching forwards as if startled or jumping into action. I'll show the positioning later on, but the outstretched hand here lines up very nicely with the ammo box of the heavy bolter, so maybe he's jumping up to clear a jam. So to lean into this effect of the model leaning, I'm putting a floating fold into the cloak. You may also notice that there's a little tear right at this point, and that's okay, don't panic. I'll get to that when it's appropriate. First, I need to sort out all of the general shapes first. The additions at the front and the hood, the edges, and the big folds. Next, I think about smaller shapes, the rises and furls, but just before I look at the smallest shapes, which is the texture, now I'll patch up this tear. I tried the same trick as in the last video, where I hold one tool underneath the area I'm working and use a second to press some extra material in. It's quite fiddly here on the cloak, as it has almost no supporting structure in itself. It takes time, but it is time well spent to get the look just right. Lastly, a few extra folds go into joining the separate pieces I've added at the shoulders to make it appear as one harmonious piece. And I'm taking the time to make it look as best as I can with my skills right now. You would expect that now I move on to painting. However, I had a close look at the texture of the loader's cloak once I had primed, and it had a pretty horrid craggy area. Now I could accept this and paint it anyway. I know that my paint scheme does camouflage the mistakes like these. However, I was really in the mood to have a go at repairing it. I brushed the area with acetone just for a few seconds to break off the primer, and once that was fully evaporated, I squished in a brand new lump of milliput. And this new piece going onto a fully cured main cloak section provided an interesting different way of doing things. I was able now to put a little more pressure than I was ever able to do previously. Even this thin sheet of milliput has just enough strength for that. I'm sure that pushing with even a moderate force will break it, it is very thin. So I'm going easy as I can whilst shaping this new section to join it together with all of the existing folds and bellows. The fact that I've gone back to repair this, not only does it make this model look a little bit nicer, but it also teaches me that I can far more easily work on a cloak when it's fitted to a model if the cloak is cured. There might be a model coming soon where that information becomes very useful. But for now, on to painting. Trying new stuff and learning is an important part of improving as a painter, and many other things as well. But so is practice. I've painted a couple of dozen Gaunt Ghost models by this point, so it's very easy to get lost in it. Speed paint and have the thing done with very little conscious effort. But that can sometimes lead to a decrease in quality. So to try to keep myself on the path of improving my skills, I've been as conscious as I can for these models. Black uniforms are still black, but I'm considering how I'm mixing my paints. Skin is still Caucasian, but I'm considering the placement of the highlights. And yes, I even painted the heavy bolter red, And yes, it's a heavy bolter, a weapon that the Tanith aren't known for using. I went into some detail about why I'm entirely unfussed about the specifics of heavy machine gun variants in my army in my first heavy weapons team video featuring Cena and Arilla. I'm even practicing dry brushing on the base, which I still can't get right, no matter how much I try, which brush I use, which paint I use, straight from the pot, mixed on the palette, left on cards to dry out. I don't think I've ever had a passable dry brush on any model, ever. My camo pattern is also still a camo pattern, but I'm trying a new style which I will mention in my next Tanith video. I've not been particularly happy with the pattern I chose all those months ago when I painted the original 2002 metal Ghost models. But the more I put it off, the more models I paint in the original scheme, then the more models I may end up having to repaint later on, assuming I want them to match. I'm not entirely convinced that I want them to match. I've spoken against the obsession with perfection and consistency when it comes to army painting. I certainly prefer a variety of styles mixed together. My Orc army, my Bretonnian army, and so far my Tanith army certainly attest to that. So in a little while, when I have a few models in different styles, I'll put them together, maybe with some terrain, and see if the differences add to each other, or if one of the styles is just a little too striking in comparison. Well, just before I wrap up, I will note that this little area where I rebuilt the milliput looks just a little bit better than the rest. It's not a big difference, but there is a difference here. Maybe in another sculpting video, I should try putting more pressure on the milliput. That seems to me to be the difference here. I had a backing for this area in the form of the first piece of cloak that I was able to push against. Well, worth a try at least. And so here, my new heavy bolter team is complete. 2 rare classic models, thoroughly devalued and added to the ranks of my ghosts. I said I would show the positions that the loader can be put in, which is an odd thing as my last loader just kind of pointed forwards. Here his hand can line up with the ammo box for the gun, or, if rotated, he can be reaching out for the binoculars. There you go. Technically, this is now a playset. And so I've played with some new techniques and practiced some old ones. While it may not look it, I have improved. The heavy weapons team here will be joining my Tanith first and only. And I've just realised I've forgotten to put the flowers and grass on this one. And thinking about it, I may have forgotten to do that on quite a few others, so I may need to go back and do that. But for you guys at home, the comment section is down below for all of the comments that you wish to make about such a model. And of course there's a description box full of all sorts of things about this video and about all of the other stuff I get up to, including a donation link if you would be so kind. For now, and until next time, I'm ED-SKaR, always will be, and thank you very much for watching.